Welcome to the Wednesday NBA slate breakdown. I'm Jason Gilbo. With me is Brent Hyden. Taking a look at tonight's slate. Really good slate once again. You know, your full Wednesday as usual. A couple games that we won't be talking too much about, but I mean, overall, we got some real games. I mean, three over 220?
Yeah, a lot of interesting games to target tonight. A couple that aren't that great might have a couple plays, and then lots of injury news to keep an eye on, and a lot of narratives tonight. You could build like an entire lineup of just narrative street players, and it might actually do pretty good.
Yeah. We didn't get the narrative Voos game out. That's a little bit of a bummer last night. But Jaylen Brown, he was the birthday boy.
Yeah, he had a huge game last night. I guess when Aaron Gordon's just dominating everything, it's kind of tougher for Vucevic, but he still got his shots. He just couldn't hit him.
So,
It happens.
Yeah. Let's dive in here. Minnesota, Detroit, first one, 208 total. Minnesota just 2-point favorites. Minnesota obviously on the back-to-back. A lot of people got burned by Jimmy Butler, the late scratch last night. He's questionable once again. We saw Jamal Crawford actually suck up a lot of minutes there. I think it was more because he was playing a little bit efficiently because actually, Tibbs does have a few guys he could go to in Butler's spot.
Yeah, obviously we saw Shabazz Muhammad get the start there. He played decent minutes, and then Jamal Crawford got some extended run because Jimmy was out. We'll get that news early. If he doesn't if he didn't take the flight with the team, then he's not going to play tonight. I'm a little surprised we haven't already seen that news, but that's something to keep an eye on. With the Minnesota side of things, if Jimmy is out, obviously you could look at Wiggins. I'm a little concerned with Wiggins and then the combination of like Shabazz and Crawford because they're going to be facing off against Stanley Johnson and Avery Bradley, who are both really good on defense. But those guys are cheap enough where you could make a case for plugging him in your lineup if you need some salary relief. Jeff Teague would be a guy that I'd have a little bit of interest in. But I don't know. I don't really like the Minnesota side of this game that much.
No, I don't either. It's been kind of tricky to figure out, and coming off a game last night against Detroit, I'm not really too thrilled. I think in range of some of their other prices of guys around them, like I prefer them more. Towns is an interesting GPP play tonight, I feel, just because I think you're going to garnish lower ownership. Once again, we still really haven't seen a huge high upside game out of him. Yet he's continuously posting like 25, 26 points and getting doubles, but we really haven't seen the big like 50, 60 burger out of him. So I'm intrigued with him on DK. 8,600 is not a bad price tag on him. So I think I'll have a share there, but that's probably about it.
Yeah, that's probably about it. I'm actually more interested in the other center in that game than I am Towns, but if you're looking in cash games, honestly, the consistency that he's offering at that price, not a terrible option.
We can look at the Detroit side here. Reggie Jackson still pretty cheap. Been playing, actually pretty well this year. He was kind of a rocky guy to roster last year, and not a bad spot. Minnesota's given up a ton of point guards this season so far, and obviously anytime Butler's off the floor, they're going to take a little bit of a hit defensively just all around. So I like Detroit side. They actually have a reasonable team total that I'm hoping goes overlooked.
Yeah, for sure. Reggie's one guy that I do actually really like because he's still fairly cheap across the industry. And if you look at it, you mentioned Minnesota getting kind of torched by point guards. They were getting torched by point guards before Darren Collison and Corey Joseph just absolutely went off on him. So this is a great spot for Reggie. Again, I will go back to the well with Tobias Harris. I'm gonna go to the well with him like every single night. Like he's my dude. I'm hoping he can come back and have a decent game. Minnesota not that great against wings so far this season. And then I mentioned the other center in that game. I really do like Andre Drummond here. I think he's going to go overlooked. The Timberwolves defense not that great. They're allowing 111, almost 112 points per game, allowing opponents to shoot like 52% from the floor, 48% twice in this season. It's just a great spot for Drummond to kind of just notch a huge game. He averaged almost 50 points against them last season. Wolves are allowing a lot of rebounds to opponents. And he's hitting his free throws, which is kind of important for Andre Drummond.
Yeah, that's been surprising. I've been, following a couple of the Detroit guys, and they're just like blown away by Drummond. It's like seeing a UFO or something. Basically, him hit his free throws at this point. So I don't mind him. I think he's a good tournament move tonight. Avery Bradley, I'm off of. So if people want to use him, because maybe tonight when I don't use him, he goes off. But it's kind of a tough spot for him.
Yeah, it really is. He's probably going to just have a huge game here. One more thing on Drummond. I noticed when I was doing research for this game that the Timberwolves are allowing 49 points per game in the paint. 98% of Andre Drummond's shot attempts come at the rim or within 14 feet of the rim. Almost none of those shots are outside of the painted area. So he's going to kind of abuse the Timberwolves in the paint tonight.
Yeah, no, good play there. Let's move on here to Houston and Philly. Good spot for both sides. I mean, 221 total. Houston just 3-point favorites. Let's talk James Harden here. He's kind of an interesting conversation because, he hasn't dropped the huge game yet this season. Still obviously priced up quite a bit, but really good spot here. Basically, I think you got a couple of tough decisions to make whether you want to go LeBron or James Harden tonight. But I guess there is enough value if you want to fit both, and you probably could.
Yeah, you definitely probably could. I think the thing to keep in mind with Harden, obviously, the usage is still pretty high. He's still having the ball in his hands a lot. He's still getting those shot attempts. One of the things that's kind of really hurting him is the fact that Houston as a whole is just shooting the ball really, really bad. They're 27.5% from three-point range this season. That's 29th in the league entering. That was as of yesterday. They're attempting 43 three-pointers per game. Eventually, those shots are going to start falling. I think that happens tonight. And when those shots start to fall, you're going to see him jump up into those 10, 11, 12, 13 assists. And the points are already there for him. The scoring is already there for him. And if he adds those assists and maybe adds a couple free throws and gets that double-double bonus, he's going to have one of those huge Harden games. And so I think this is a spot for him to come out and have a Harden-esque type game.
Yeah, I'm in agreement. I mean, I like some other Rockets as well. Like I like Clint Capella here. Philly once again, a bottom 10 rebounding team. Capella's going to probably see a decent amount of minutes. He was a guy that was kind of tough to trust, but still really cheap. You look at his production this year. I mean, averaging 15 and 9. He's kind of hard to get away from his prices because I'm not in love with actually a lot of the higher price centers tonight.
Yeah, I absolutely love Capella tonight. The minutes are a little bit of concern, but something to note from Jonathan Fagan, one of the beat writers in Houston, included this in one of his articles this morning. It was a quote from Mike D'Antoni talking about injuries to Ariza and Nene. And he said, this is going to happen periodically through the year, and Clint will have to play a bigger role. We have the resources to get it done. We just have to get it done. That kind of tells me that, they're going to be leaning on Clint a lot tonight. His price is really cheap. It's a great matchup. With Luke Richard and Mbah a Moute moving into the starting lineup, it's going to limit their ability to go small at times because they're going to have to use Tucker to back up Luke Richard. It's a great spot for Capella. And obviously Eric Gordon's in a good spot. I definitely don't mind going back to low with him. His price hasn't climbed to a point where I'm uncomfortable playing him. And then if you want to go cheap, as much as I hate to say it, you could use Ryan Anderson.
Oh, I know that took a lot out of you to say.
Whew, that hurt. That hurt me down deep in my soul.
I know it, man. I love Eric Gordon tonight. I just, you look at the price tag, it really hasn't climbed up all that much from where he was at the beginning of the year. Shooting the ball really well. I mean, God, there's been a couple of games where he just, from 15 3-point attempts against Memphis, 13 against Sacramento. Been above 30 DK points in 3 or 4 games this year. I just think he's going to come off the bench and continue to actually produce in a huge role. So minutes are fairly safe with him. Good spot. I mean, I think if you're not going hard and you want to go some other directions, I think Gordon's the guy. Like I want to play one of the 2 shooting guards from Houston, I think, in lineups tonight.
Yeah, getting exposure to one of the guys that's going to handle the ball a lot in this Houston offense is going to be important. So if you're fading Harden, I would suggest that you have Eric Gordon in your lineup.
Yep. On the Philly side, kind of some interesting news. Obviously, Fultz out. 3 games, it looks like he probably shouldn't have even played to begin with this year. He's been playing about 16, 17 minutes a game. It kind of frees up a little bit of more role for, basically guys like Bayless and TJ McConnell to pretty much run the point guard spots.
Yeah, it's going to open up a few minutes. I'm still kind of tinkering with how I want to attack that situation. I may just fade. I may fade the point guard portion of that. If you really, really wanted to, you could probably imagine TJ McConnell getting close to 20, 22, maybe even 24 minutes. And at 3K on DraftKings, probably around the same price on FanDuel, you could talk me into playing him as a replacement for Fultz there.
Yeah. I mean, I like McConnell. Wanted to like U of A basketball, but he was a guy that I just kind of like plugged and play when he was getting above 25 plus minutes. I think the guard that I had the most interest in is JJ Redick. You just look at Houston. I mean, bottom 5 in opposing 3-point percentage allowed. Redick's a guy who I can see getting 20 real points tonight in this type of game, notching a couple assists and maybe doing a little bit more. So I think at his price tag, I don't mind him. Probably not a ton of huge upside, but I think if you want like your shooting guard 2 on FanDuel to be Redick, I don't hate it.
Yeah, I mean, I think you could probably pencil him in for close to 30 fantasy point upside. And if you really think about it, so Simmons is going to be on the court a lot, and Robert Covington obviously on the court a lot. And you're going to see Luke Richard and PJ Tucker guarding those guys. Redick's going to be running all over the floor, coming off screens with some catch and shoot opportunities, and it's going to be Harden and Gordon that are going to chase him around. And we know those guys don't really like chasing anybody around. So Redick's going to play an important role in this offense. So I do really, really like him as a really cheap shooting guard option and small forward option on DraftKings.
Yeah, and you mentioned Covington and Simmons in a tougher spot. I have some interest in Covington because his price is fairly decent, and he's basically a guy who, if he gets hot, he's hot. He also can rack up quite a bit of steals, which I like the potential of there. So I don't mind Covington and GPPs tonight. What are your thoughts on Ben Simmons as well? Because I know you kind of had a little hesitation, especially at his new price tag.
Yeah, it's really tough. He's looking at 8,800 on FanDuel and 8,800 on DraftKings. Obviously, I think it's worth some exposure, and GPP is definitely not a cash game play for me. I wouldn't shy away from using him in a few lineups in GPPs just because he does seem to have that potential where he can just kind of overcome a matchup. So I kind of like him, and I know I'm more enamored with him after I learned what his nickname is last night. Would you want to take a guess at what it is?
I does it have to do with anything Australian?
No, not really.
Oh, I don't know.
It's the Wizard of Oz.
Huh.
I don't know. I don't know where he got that nickname from, but it's pretty awesome. I kind of want to have like a Wizard of Oz lineup and plug Ben Simmons in there.
Huh. It must be because he's just been a wizard offensively this year.
Maybe.
I don't know. That's a good little tidbit. I may have to plug him in extra tonight just based on nickname. So,
there you go.
Embiid, the other guy, obviously still not a guy who's going to break 28 minutes. I just have a hard time paying his price for. Basically, I do want huge upside out of which he has, but I guess when we look at things, I mean, he's not a guy who's probably going to crack 50 at this rate.
It's going to be tough for him, but I do think he's definitely worth a look again in GPPs because there is just a massive amount of upside in a matchup like this.
And you look at Houston. I mean, I think what killed him obviously in the last game was the 7 turnovers over on FanDuel. That was brutal, but overall, I mean, the production, the usage is still going to be sky high. I kind of just like the lower ends. I guess that's kind of where I'm headed.
I will say this. If you look at his game logs against Houston last season, 31.5 fantasy points in 22 minutes and 56.3 in 28.2 minutes.
Oh, man.
The upside is there. I might have just talked you into more Embiid exposure.
Yeah, maybe I do have a share in there. But, yeah, I guess when I look at things like I kind of we'll get into some of the centers I like a little bit more later on. But anyone else from that game?
Nope.
Denver, Charlotte next here, 212 total. Denver heading into Charlotte for this game. This one, I'm not really all that appealed with him compared to some of the other high-scoring games. I mean, I don't mind Kemba Walker here. You mentioned the Denver pace, which last year was obviously up in pace this year. I mean, they've kind of taken a step back. Small sample size. I mean, do you expect that to hold?
I kind of do. They just look like a team that's just going to play slower this year, and obviously you have a plotter and Millsap down there in the paint, so that kind of slows things down a little bit. But yeah, I think the pace is going to stick. Obviously, they've played slow paced teams. They played Washington, and that game was played at about 102.7 possessions, so the pace was a little bit higher in that one, but not really high. So I don't know that I really want to look too much at this game outside of like one or two players.
Like, I don't mind Kemba Walker tonight just because the usage is going to be there. It's a good spot just for him in this offense at home. Denver, obviously going back to last year, not great at defending point guards. I do think the addition of Millsap and obviously Jokic at the rim, I think they're a little bit better defensively. So if Kemba's outside shot is dropping, I don't mind him. I think he's probably the only guy. I mean, Jeremy Lamb, I guess, is a guy I would maybe look to consider because he's still in that mid range. But I'm off of Howard. We've been talking Howard quite a bit over the last few pods. Not really on him tonight.
Yeah, I'm not really either. If you look at it, the Nuggets are allowing the second fewest rebounds per game to opponents. They're only allowing like 37.7, so that's going to cap Howard's upside, I think, a little bit. It's basically Kemba for me, and with MKG being back and playing like 14 minutes tonight, I think that's going to eat into some of these guys like Marvin and Lamb. It's going to take a few minutes out, so I'm not terribly high on that side of the game or the Denver side, to be honest.
Yeah, Denver was a team that really didn't have anyone chalked up to play. Like, usually I have a couple of maybe honorable mentions, but I actually don't like the Denver side at all here.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting if you look at some of the stats from the first three games for Denver. They've given the ball. They've had 20 turnovers so far per game in their first three games. So that's really concerning. That's obviously negative points on both sides. So Jokic would be the only guy. It looks like he kind of busted out and decided he was going to shoot. So last year in two matchups against the Hornets, he had 28.5 points per game, 13.5 rebounds, and 7 assists, shot 77.4%. Obviously, that was without Dwight, so that's going to change things a little bit. Jokic, that was terrible. Jokic is going to be the only guy that I really have some GPP interest in from Denver.
Yeah, I think in terms of upside, I mean, he's probably the only one that's really carrying it right now.
Yep.
The backcourt's just been really spread out. It's been a tough one to peg, and I feel like on a full slate, I don't need to take the chances with some of those guys like Harris and Murray and Barton. The other one, I don't like going there.
Yeah, neither do I.
So, Cleveland and Brooklyn here, 227. Cleveland 7-point favorites. I'll be honest, I was not a big LeBron guy last night on the pod, and then Point LeBron came into the picture, and that was a different story, and now we get Point LeBron here tonight. It kind of throws a wrench into things if you're looking to load up on Harden, because now I feel like you need to at least split some shares with LeBron.
I am going to do everything I can to actually get the two of them in my lineups tonight. It's probably viable. I haven't really tried that much, but yeah, you mentioned Point LeBron. Lineup is already out for that game. They're going back to that lineup again. 31% usage rate in that game yesterday as the point guard. Love had a 30.8% usage rate. Those would be the two guys that I'm really targeting from this matchup, and then Tristan Thompson as well. If you look at it, like, Vegas is projecting this game to be fairly close. It's like a 6 or 7 point spread. I think people are going to interpret that a little differently and think that Cleveland is going to blow them out. Like, Brooklyn is not as bad as people think. Cleveland is probably a little worse right now than people think. Obviously, they've struggled against Chicago and Orlando. I'm not necessarily as concerned with a blowout in this matchup as most people might be. And I want to get some exposure to either LeBron or Love or Tristan Thompson, who's really, really cheap across the industry.
Yeah, and you mentioned last night that the reason if Cleveland was to blow out Chicago it was because of the LeBron upside and him just going off. And I didn't take it into consideration as much. I think in tonight's matchup I do a little bit more with him running point. Yeah, like you said, Love can finally kind of get out and run around a little bit more, playing the four, which is where he's played, in his career for the most part. So I like Love here, as you mentioned, that usage rate much higher than where it was the previous few games. Thompson's interesting because once again, I don't mind attacking Brooklyn with opposing centers, and there's a couple of other cheap centers where I think Thompson might gather maybe a little bit lower ownership.
Yeah, and this really could be a extremely high scoring game. And if we look at the Nets, they're allowing 122.5 points per game. They allowed 140 versus Indiana in the season opener, but they're still scoring a lot of points too. So yeah, I want to get some exposure here to Cleveland side of things, and it's probably going to be one of these expensive guys because I just don't really like any of the cheap guys because none of them are really worth a darn except maybe J.R. Smith.
Yeah, no, I'm in agreement. On the Brooklyn side, I have some interest in like Levert again and Demary Carroll. Like I don't mind those two. Um, Rondé Hollis-Jefferson, I was off from last night. He had a pretty solid game. I think when I look at Carroll and Levert are probably the only two options I'm going to be considering here for Brooklyn.
Yeah, I mean, I don't mind going back to D'Angelo Russell. Little concerning that he basically did nothing but score last night. He only had one assist in that game. He's averaging about 23 points per game. Um, it's a good spot for him. We saw Jerry and Grant just go off against Cleveland last night. Like with LeBron playing point guard, I don't think he's really trying that hard on the defensive end. And I didn't watch that game to see how he matched up on defense. I plan on watching that game a little bit later, but Russell's a guy that I do have a little bit of interest in. I think people are going to shy away from the rest of these Brooklyn pieces because, their minutes are basically capped at like 30. You're not going to see a guy, most of them go over 30 minutes, but I like Karis LeVert. I like Trevor Booker, Rondé Hollis-Jefferson. Those are the three guys I'd kind of look at in the spot.
Yeah, Levert's been really impressive. I feel. I mean, rebounding a little bit more over the last few games. He's been a guy who's picked up a couple of assists here. So they're moving the ball around pretty well right now. I like the way they're flowing. I think Cleveland, like you said, defensively, they've taken a little bit of a step back. I mean, I think we get another year older with LeBron. Kevin Love's never really been a big defensive guy. A lot of the other secondary pieces are not interested in defense either. So I mean, I like this Brooklyn side. I don't mind it as like a game stack either.
And I think Demary Carroll's interesting as well. He seems to be just a consistent option. I was a little worried last night because he started really slow, but he ended up finishing over 30 fantasy points. Took 11 shots against Orlando. It's definitely an interesting spot for him as well.
Yep. Indiana OKC 14-point spread here for the Thunder, 218 total. Once again, we're without Miles Turner. Indiana, they shocked me a little bit last night. They played pretty well. I don't know if Minnesota just came out and played flat, but Indiana is definitely intriguing. I know you're not buying the spread.
Yeah, I'm really not. Indiana has surprised me all season long. They've actually looked really well. They're shooting the ball just insanely well. They're fourth in the NBA in points per game at 118.5. They lead the NBA in field goal percentage at 51.9%. The downside, though, is they're fourth in the NBA in points allowed at 116. This is probably going to be a high scoring game. I'm not buying the spread. I think it stays a little bit closer. I've watched Oklahoma City pretty closely, and in the past, they've tended to play down to lower quality opponents and play up to higher quality opponents. And I think this game stays close for the most part. And even if it does blow out, we saw opening night, OKC blew out the Knicks and Paul George still played almost 40 minutes. Russell Westbrook played like 33 minutes. Melo was the only one that didn't play huge minutes. I'm looking at it right now. I guess he played 34. So even if this game blows out, as long as it's close, mostly through the fourth quarter, you're going to see full minutes from OKC guys.
Yeah, and I like the OKC side quite a bit here. Like I love Steven Adams tonight. Good spot, against basically a Miles Turnerless, Pacers front court. You're going to get basically him going up against Sabonis and Al Jefferson most of the time. Like I'm completely fine with using Steven Adams in that spot, and who's solid rebounder, has that block upside as well. Really a nice price tag because I think my direction is going to be spending up for LeBron and Harden. I don't think I'm going to be able to spend up at center. So Abs is probably going to be actually one of my core guys tonight.
Yeah, he's a guy I do really like. And I think people are going to look at Cat's performance against Indiana last night and maybe shy away a little bit. But I think this is an excellent spot for Adams here. And then obviously, I would never tell anyone not to play Russell Westbrook because it's Russell Westbrook. And despite having 3 ball dominant people in that offense, he's still almost averaging a triple double on the season. um, Paul George is my dude today, though. He got the revenge narrative. He came out and said that he's really motivated to help the Thunder win against his former team. Indiana's just getting abused on the wings so far this season. They're allowing 45.39 points to small forwards, 51.23 to power forwards. And if you look at their opponents, with the exception to Minnesota, they haven't played anybody that has dominant forwards, dominant wings. So I love Paul George here. He's going to go overlook. The 8K price tag is really, really nice. Usage rate is pretty high in this offense. His biggest downside so far this season, he's just not hitting his shots. I think that happens tonight.
Yeah, I do too. And George is taking quite a bit of 3-point shots as well this year. I mean, 8, 9, 13 his first 3 games. Like you said, I mean, he hasn't really been hitting. 10 steals already on the year for Paul George. I mean, I like it. I like the usage rate that he has. It's right around 27%. I think if I'm coming off LeBron at the small forward position up top, it's going to be for Paul George. Good spot here, like you said. I like Paul George quite a bit. I think, him and Adams are going to be the guys I use because, like you said, Westbrook, I mean, I'm never, you're never not going to say don't play Westbrook, but he's a guy I probably won't make a priority this year.
Yeah, I mean, if I'm paying up tonight, it's Harden over Westbrook, and I'm hoping that doesn't bite me in the butt.
Yeah. And Sabonis, we got the revenge game here. I wasn't buying it, but maybe I'll start here. He's shooting 70%, which it's going to come down, but he's, like you said, you looked into it a lot, actually, of how Sabonis is playing.
Yeah, we were talking about it a little bit before we started recording. Sabonis is playing as kind of operating in the pick and roll a lot as the roll man. He's doing that 42.2% of the time, scoring 63.2% of the time in those situations, averaging like 1.32 points per possession as the roll man in this offense. It's been a very good. He's been really good doing that. He looked good doing that in OKC, just didn't get a lot of opportunity. OKC's pretty good defending the roll man in those situations because you have Adams who can actually step out on the perimeter a little bit and defend. You have Melo and Paul George who are actually trying on defense this year. So I think this is a spot where Sabonis may struggle, but if you look at it at 5K, you're going to get a guy that hopefully will play closer to 30 minutes. I wouldn't fault anyone for going back there with, the revenge narrative.
Yeah.
I don't know that I really want Oladipo in the spot because Andre is going to guard him, and Andre is obviously a great defender. So I'm off Oladipo here.
Yeah, I am too. Unless Roberson gets sick and then Oladipo can get lucky again.
Yeah. That would be it there. I think the point guards are definitely interesting. I don't mind double stacking Corey Joseph and Collison in lineups. We saw Collison just go off against Minnesota, 15 points, 16 assists. Corey Joseph played 25 minutes. He's played 25 minutes and at least 25 in 3 of the 4 games. He's playing as the 2 guard sometimes. He's closed a couple games this season. He would be a cheap option that I'm interested in.
Yeah, no, definitely don't mind that. So definitely one of the higher games to target. San Antonio, Miami. We get to a little dry spell here with these next few games. Spurs Heat, one of the lower totals on the night, 195. Hassan Whiteside still out. I basically had 2 guys from this game. It was LaMarcus Aldridge and DeJounte Murray. Murray, I don't know. I mean, you mentioned he's giving Westbrook a run for his money in terms of a rebounding point guard, and he's shown it, and the price really still hasn't come up. So I definitely don't mind it. Miami's been playing at a little bit quicker pace. They haven't been that great defensively. I'm okay with using Murray here. Yeah,
I actually really like Murray in the spot. The Heat are actually allowing guards to kind of just abuse him on the glass, especially without Whiteside there. So far in the season, they're allowing 26.8 rebounds per game to guards. There's only 2 teams worse in the NBA than the Heat right now, and that's Raptors and Sixers. And we saw Murray pull down 10 rebounds against the Raptors, 14 rebounds against the Raptors. That's that game where he put up 42 fantasy points. Minutes are there for him. The role in this offense is there for him. I really, really like Murray in the spot. And then you mentioned LaMarcus Aldridge again. Just the offense um, relies heavily on him as well. So I don't mind going with LaMarcus Aldridge, and he's gonna go overlooked in the spot. I guarantee it.
Yeah, he is. This game, I think, in general, just overall, is going to be one of the people we're glossing over it. I think a lot of people will as well, but people will gloss over it more than we do. You actually had some interest in the Heat side. I'm kind of off the Heat side.
I mean, really, the only interest I have is going to be Kelly Olynyk and James Johnson. Again, those guys just playing big minutes without Whiteside, and this is a spot where Kelly Olynyk can come into the game off the bench and kind of abuse the immobile guys that they have on that second unit for the Spurs. So I don't mind going there. I think there's a few other spots that I would go over those two, but it'd be that the Dion Waiters news is going to be important. If he sits out, you could look at Wayne Ellington, Josh Richardson, but Waiters, I believe, participated in shoot around this morning, but he's still a game time decision. I would expect him to play.
Memphis, Dallas, next one here, 194 total. This is not a fantasy appealing game. The only interest I really had was taking basically a punch shot with Brooks or James Ennis again. That was basically it for me between both teams. Mike Conley, you mentioned, but we're talking a little bit before the show. I kind of like some guys a little bit cheaper, I think, when I really break things down. I don't know if Conley's really going to quite carry that upside on tonight's slate.
Yeah, I don't know if I can fit him in my lineups, just kind of the way construction's going. But again, this would be a decent spot for him to bounce back after a couple bad games. We've seen Dallas just not really be able to defend anyone early on the season, except the guys that like Harrison Barnes is covering. So I do like Conley. I said last time he's not going to shoot 21% from the floor going against Houston. Well, I was right, but he only shot 30% from the floor. So eventually that's going to turn around. He's going to have a huge game, and it could be here. I don't see him having just a massive upside game, but he could definitely get you 30, 35 fantasy points. If you want to target Gasol, I don't really hate it. Dallas, again, a terrible rebounding team. This could be a spot where Gasol could pull in double-digit rebounds, and of course we know he's going to get 20, 24 real points. So you could look there as a pivot off of some of the other guys, but I don't have interest in really anyone else from Memphis, and I don't want anyone from Dallas here.
I'm with you. Utah Phoenix 203 total here. I kind of like this game actually a little bit on the Utah side. Ricky Rubio, really nice price tag over on DraftKings. I don't mind him tonight at all. Really good spot against Phoenix. They struggled obviously against guards for what seemingly seems like the entire time DFS has been around. Rubio's taken quite a bit of shots. I think the usage rate has been fairly impressive for Rubio just because of the lack of the other options. Getting pretty decent minutes, over 30 minutes in all four games. I think 6,800 is a nice price for Rubio, and I think there actually is some reasonable upside here.
Yeah, I completely agree there. Rubio's a point guard that I do have a lot of interest in just because, again, the matchup is outstanding. It's going to be a paced-up game. The Phoenix Suns are terrible. They're allowing just insane amount of points so far this season, 125.3 to opponents. They're allowing 47 rebounds per game to opponents. This is a great spot for a lot of players on Utah. Obviously, Rodney Hood news is going to play a little bit of a role. I wouldn't expect him to play. Joe Ingles caught the Rodney Hood gastric distress disease yesterday. He played limited minutes in that game. Only played 18 against the Clippers. Would monitor that situation, but I'd go back to the well with him if he's feeling a little bit better. They said right before the game, they said he couldn't hold down any food or liquid for like 24 hours. So that concerns me. So if he plays, you could go there. But if he sits, I really, really want to play Thabo Sefolosha, even though he doesn't have a ton of upside. And maybe someone like Donovan Mitchell, who actually finally scored a few points last night. He put up 19. So those would be the guard situation that I'll look at there.
Yeah, I kind of have some interest in Rudy Gobert tonight as a low-owned center.
This is an absolute amazing spot for Rudy Gobert. People are going to look at this game, and for the DVP truthers are going to look and see that the Phoenix Suns rank 5th against centers. They're only allowing 48 fantasy points per game. But if you dig into it, this is the outlier. This is the thing that stood out the most for me. Against the Lakers, Brook Lopez pulled in 11 rebounds. Brook Lopez pulled in 11 rebounds. 10 of those rebounds, 10 were on the defensive glass. Lopez ranked in the 5th percentile for big men in defensive rebounding percentage. If you're allowing Brook Lopez to get double-digit rebounds, imagine what someone like Rudy Gobert is going to do to you. This is a feast spot for Rudy Gobert tonight. I want to have some exposure to him. It's really tough because I like Capella and I like the aforementioned Brook Lopez a little bit. I want to get some exposure here to Utah. Rudy Gobert's in a great spot, and then Rubio. I don't know. I don't know how I'm going to do it, but one of these guys is going to be in my lineup.
Yeah, I think when you look at things lineup construction wise, this game can kind of change it for you and change things around a little bit if you plug in a guy like Gobert. Yeah, like as you mentioned, I think the Brook Lopez stands out. Suns allowing the 7th most rebounds to opposing centers this season, which always surprises me. I guess they have some big guys in the front court that I guess it baffles me a little bit, but I like Gobert in this spot. I don't really have any interest in Derek Favors tonight. He just hasn't flashed the upside. He's not playing a ton of minutes still. It's a bummer, man. Favors is talented. I was a fan of his coming in, and I just don't think he's ever really going to turn out.
Health has been a huge issue for him.
Yeah, so
it sucks.
Yep. Moving on here, take a look at Washington and LA, your highest total of the night so far, 230, Washington 6-point favorites. There's a lot to kind of go around and break down in this one.
There is a lot to digest in this matchup, and obviously, just in case someone comments, we skipped over Phoenix.
Yeah.
It's so hard right now. Mike James is probably going to play a lot of minutes. You could look at him, but his price has come up where I don't really have interest in him. Marquise Chris, another interesting guy, but foul trouble there, and who knows what they're going to do with this big rotation. They're still playing Chandler just too many minutes, so I'm fading Phoenix here.
Yeah, Marquise Chris was actually the only one I really had a GPP interest in, just given the fact that his price is actually super cheap. But foul trouble, I know the floor with him, it's super low with given the foul trouble, the rotation. So I know what I get myself into, and the fact that the Jazz isn't a good matchup anyway. But I like the usage. What I saw from him in that first game, he looked like he had some better energy and was ready to go and kind of prove that he needs a bigger role. So, which we knew. We knew already, but apparently the Suns don't. So he'd be the only guy.
It didn't take a visionary to figure out that Marquise Chris needed more minutes, right?
No. We could have a little 5-year-old come and go, that guy's pretty good. Let's give him some more minutes.
Yeah. So. Yeah. But back to Washington, I guess. Narrative Street here tonight with John Wall. The narrative is strong. Marcin Gortat came out and said that Wall is going to punish Lonzo Ball for 48 minutes or torture him for 48 minutes. I don't know about you. You can give me your opinion on this, but it's really tough to fade that narrative right there, isn't it?
It is. It really is. And we're tossing Wall into kind of a category with LeBron and Harden tonight because of his price tag. And I think those are the 3 superstars and 3 double-digit guys that I look to pay up for tonight. Wall probably being 3rd. But yeah, building multiple lineups, I think you got to get some exposure.
Yeah, it is really just a great spot for him. We know the Lakers defense not that great. They've been a little better this year, but they're still not very good. Wall's not scoring quite as much. Like his last game is Denver only scored 19. Scoring totals have actually fallen over the last 2 games, but his assists have gone up. So that's good to see. He's getting to the line a little bit more. He leads the NBA in foul shots made per game at 10. I think he's attempting 11.7 per game. So when you're getting a guy that's going to the line, that's definitely interesting. 10K, it's a little tough to get him in there, but I don't know. Scott Brooks might throw him out there for 45 minutes and say, go torture Lonzo Ball to shut up his father. You never know.
It could happen. When you look at things, like you said, Wall, we haven't really seen, obviously, the huge breakout game, but there's probably a 25, 30, and 15 game coming at some point, and that tonight could be very well that night. Yeah, I'm about it. I like the secondary pieces here as well. Like I like Otto Porter. His DraftKings price is really nice. The production has been incredibly solid from Porter. I don't mind Kelly Oubre either. 4,200 on DraftKings. Look at his minutes: 38, 36, and 32. Obviously the down game against Detroit, but for the most part, he's playing pretty well defensively too. 6 steals on the year. I'll take that in a guy who's playing heavy minutes against the Lakers. So I think when you look at things, the only guy that I'm not really interested in is Bradley Beal.
Yeah, I think it's important to note with Oubre, Jason Smith could come back tonight, which that could eat into his minutes just a little bit. They said that Smith would come off the bench even if he was able to return tonight. But if he sits, you're definitely looking at a lot of minutes for Oubre against a team that's prone to turn the ball over. I do like him a lot. You mentioned Otto Porter, great spot for him. Yeah, I'm not quite as high on Beal because he's going to face off against Kentavious Caldwell-Pope on defense, I would assume, unless they try to switch him onto Wall, which is an interesting strategy to consider if they're gonna try to stick KCP on Wall. That could limit his upside. So that's kind of the Washington side of things for me.
Yeah, I don't mind Gortat here, just because defensively, Brook Lopez not a huge threat, I think, to Gortat. When you look at the Lakers rebounding, I mean, 29th in the league. Gortat's a guy who I think can come in and put up like a big 10 and 15 game or 12 and 17 or whatever. Like, look at what he did against Philly. I mean, I know the blocks were there, but against a bad rebounding team, I could see him pulling down actually a ton of rebounds tonight. So I'll take it at 5,500. Usage obviously isn't on par with some of the other guys tonight, but I definitely don't mind him at his price tag.
Yeah, he's an interesting spot. The one concern I do have with him is, we do know Brook Lopez has that ability to stretch the floor out to the 3-point line and pull big men away from the basket, which that could actually limit Gortat's upside just a little bit. So that would be something that I might have a little concern with. But he's performed pretty well against Lopez in the past. Obviously, it's a little bit different situation. But if you're looking for someone in that price range, 5,500, it's not a terrible option.
Yeah, like when I look, like he ranks probably third for me out of Capella and what's the other, Steven Adams. When I'm looking at that price range, Lakers side here. This one's an interesting spot because you like Brook Lopez quite a bit in this one. He's had some good history against the Wizards.
Yeah, Brook Lopez is a guy that I'm really interested in tonight, more so just because of his price at $6K. That's really, really cheap for the upside that he offers. Obviously, we do have to be a little bit concerned because Luke Walton seems to use like lottery balls for his minutes rotations and just randomly play people 18 minutes. But he's been productive for the Lakers so far this season. I mentioned when talking about Gortat that Lopez does a great job of stretching the floor, and that's something that they need him to do. They want him to do that because it helps benefit Lonzo Ball. He's taking he has 5 3-point attempts in 2 games, 3 in another. He's shooting the ball pretty well from 3-point range, about 30%, which is decent for a big. About 40% from the floor. So it's a good spot for him. I really do like him a lot. And then KCP is the other guy that I'm really, really interested in. We saw him come in last game after missing the first 2 with the suspension. Scored 20 points on 7 of 11 shooting. He can add the defensive stats going up against Washington. That's important. I do really, really like KCP and Lopez here as 2 cheap options in this game.
Yeah, Caldwell Pope, I think, is going to be pretty much a staple for me tonight at his price tag, and the fact that defensively, I mean, in this type of matchup that's going to be up pace, he's going to end up with a couple steals and a couple blocks. He's a lengthy defender. I like him. I mean, obviously shot really well in the first game against New Orleans. He's not a guy who's going to shoot, above 50% or 60% moving forward, but I like him. Like I said, the price tag on both sides, I think, is really intriguing.
Yeah, you could also, I mean, you could make a case for Lonzo. Obviously, he's playing really, really well, almost averaging a double-double on the season. I think he was like 1 assist shy against Phoenix for a triple-double, had a huge game in that one. Jordan Clarkson averaging like 19.7 points in only 21.7 minutes. He just comes off the bench and just chucks shots like crazy. He's still fairly cheap. Kyle Kuzma is still fairly cheap. You could look at him and Larry Nance as two guys that you could fill in these small forward, power forward positions if you want to get exposure there.
Clarkson, I think on FanDuel is where I have the most interest if I'm using him, just because he does offer up. I believe it's like $1,000 discount from KCP over there.
Yeah, he's pretty cheap. It's $1,000.
So yeah, I don't mind that if you need that extra cash. That from the Lakers side.
Yep.
All righty, Toronto Golden State here. Do you have a line? I don't see a line. I think that's kind of because there's some of the injury news for Toronto.
It is Golden State favored by 13, 228 over under right now.
Huh. That's interesting. I don't know. I mean, that's kind of, I feel like it's a little bit high, I guess, but I know Warriors at home is always a double-digit spread, it seems.
Yeah, it seems that way, and obviously with injury concerns in this matchup, that probably factors into it a little bit. Looks like it's been bet down about a point so far since it came out, so it might drop. It might drop under 10 here by the end of the day.
Yeah. Let's start with Toronto side. A lot to break down here. DeMar DeRozan questionable. Valanciunas out tonight. I mean, Kyle Lowry, the first thing I think that we talked about when we popped on here is his price tag.
Yeah, obviously I know he's been terrible to start the season. You don't have to look too deep into it. Like his price tag wouldn't be that low if he hadn't been terrible. Obviously, he had about over 30 fantasy points in his first two games against San Antonio, which is predictably a bad matchup. He had a terrible outing at 15.5 fantasy points. If he's going to, this is going to be a fast-paced game. It's going to be a high-scoring game. If Toronto's going to stay close, Lowry's going to have a huge role in that, especially if DeRozan sits. And it's really tough to look at usage rate for Lowry without DeRozan because there's been so much turnover on this roster since last season. But if you kind of just date it back 2 seasons and you take guys like Terrence Ross and a few of these other guys that are not in Toronto anymore, Lowry has a 30% usage rate. It's like 1.16 fantasy points per minute without DeRozan in the lineup. So if he sits, it's a great spot for Lowry to actually put up a huge game. And I have interest even if DeRozan plays, just because I don't think people are going to look at him. They're going to look at that box score and see just how terrible he's been and move on.
Yeah, I like Lowry. I'm rolling the dice on him. I think either way with DeRozan in or out. I guess I'm slightly concerned because the usage rate hasn't really been there this year for Lowry. They've moved things around a little bit. Norman Powell, obviously stepping into the rotation, he's taken on a little bit more of a bigger role offensively. I know Valanciunas obviously took a bigger step before getting injured in terms of offense. It was kind of DeRozan and Lowry, and that was it last year. And now we kind of had to think of some other pieces. So that concerns me moving forward if this trend continues, but I like him tonight.
Yeah. And just a quick piece of news. It looks like Jimmy Butler has been ruled out. So we got that news early tonight.
12:30, baby.
Who knows? We might get news at like 5 minutes after lock that Jimmy Butler is now questionable to play.
He helicoptered into the stadium. He's back in playing.
Dropped in with the parachute. But yeah. You bring up a good point. Norman Powell has a bigger role in this offense. Valanciunas had a bigger role before he went down, but obviously Valanciunas is out. Lucas Nogueira is doubtful. That's going to change things around a little bit. That's going to put Jakob Poeltl in the starting lineup most likely. If they decide to bring him off the bench, you could see them start Serge at the 5. You could see like Norman Powell and CJ Miles or Norman Powell and DeMar DeRozan move down a spot and then play CJ Miles or DeLon Wright at shooting guard. It's something that we're going to really have to keep an eye on, but I like Powell here. This is a great spot for him. CJ Miles is a guy that I just absolutely love tonight, coming off the bench at 3,900. He's going to play like 24, 25 minutes, and he comes into the game. He shoots a lot of threes, and that's pretty much what he's designed. That's what they brought him in for. This could be a high-scoring game from CJ Miles here, and people don't like to play him because they think he just doesn't do anything.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think when you look at all these guys here on the Toronto side, there's a lot of value to be had in a high scoring game. And And yeah, like you said, I mean, Miles is a guy you expect to come off and play 20 plus minutes and jack up a fair amount of shots. You know, he's a sharpshooting 3-pointer guy. I mean, that's just the type of player that he is. You're not getting anything more. I mean, he does have the ability to go out there and grab 4 or 5 rebounds, which is nice out of him. But I don't mind it for his price. I mean, 3,900 on DK, I think that's a really reasonable price. Yeah, I think you kind of look at this. He's only 35 on FanDuel. Like, so if you're building stars and scrubs, I think Miles is a guy you kind of plug in.
Yeah, and if this game does blow out, he's going to be the guy that's going to get some blowout run. And if you look at it, when he comes into the game against Chicago, 9 3-pointers attempted, 6 against Philly, 7 against San Antonio. He's just going to shoot. Shooter's going to shoot. He's going to go Nick Young on us, and he's going to have a big game, I think.
Warrior side of things, this one, I mean, if you're expecting this one to stay close, I think we have to kind of take some look of this Warrior side. I kind of rank them a little bit lower than some of the other guys that we talked about. Like, we've kind of made our core pieces already, so I don't know how much the Warriors exposure I'm going to get. I don't mind Draymond as always, just given the fact that he's kind of the cheaper of guys like Curry. I like a lot of other point guards tonight over Curry, but I could see using these guys in GPPs.
Yeah, it's kind of tough to figure out where you want to go here on the Golden State side of things, especially if this game is going to be high scoring. One thing I did forget to mention, Jakob Poeltl is definitely in play at his price across the industry for Toronto. But on the Golden State side of things, there's 2 guys that I'm interested in. One of them because he's just been outstanding so far to start the season, and that's Kevin Durant. He's just been all over the place, getting the blocks, getting steals, racking up assists. He's averaging 24 points per game. He's been shooting the ball 50% from 3-point range. I wrote him up in one spot today. I think he's the guy that I'm really targeting from this side of the game, especially considering how shorthanded Toronto may be. He could really dominate a couple of these guys inside. And then Klay Thompson, I think it has to be talked about again. We're mentioning another narrative here, but Klay Thompson, he made a pledge for every point that he scores at the next 3 home games, he's going to donate $1,000 to the North Bay Fire Relief. That's something where you're going to see this guy come out and really, really be motivated to score. And if he gets hot, they're going to feed him the ball. So I like playing the Klay Thompson narrative in GPPs.
That's going to be some cash, man. Like, he's going to be given some cash. Like, that's a good thing. And when you look at, like, obviously his shooting percentage and overall, I mean, in his career, like, he's going to be, well, I mean, minimum of 20 points if he's in tonight's game.
Yeah, I mean, he's averaging 20.5 right now. So that's a huge chunk of cash. He's shooting really well. I mean, start the season 43% from 3-point range, 50% from the floor. 6,600 on DraftKings. What is he on FanDuel? He's 7,100 on FanDuel. That's a spot where I would definitely be willing to go here.
Sure. As far as like other guys, I mean, Curry, a little too expensive, I feel like, on this slate. You know, I can see it. Kyle Lowry is still an above average defender. Curry finally kind of got off the schneid, I guess you could say, this year and bringing that upside against Dallas. I guess Memphis, he played pretty well too. But overall, I mean, I guess DK, 8,700 is probably where I would use him the most. 94 is a little expensive on FanDuel.
Yeah, probably. Draymond Green's interesting at 7,200 on DraftKings. A little more expensive on FanDuel, but that's definitely a good spot. And I did forget to mention, I talked about DeLon Wright for the Toronto side. I do have a lot of interest in him. If this game does blow out, he'll get an extended run, but he's already playing a decent amount of minutes. And again, baskets to go around in this spot.
Yeah, and you mentioned before the show that Toronto could have a tendency to go small in this type of game.
Yep.
So that's it for us. High-scoring player on the slate. I'm not going to limit because we have a lot of options to go with tonight.
Man, I might take the chalk option and go with James Harden. I'm gonna call it right now. James Harden, 70 fantasy points.
70, I like it. I'm gonna go Wall here. I'm gonna go the narrative with Wall and just say that he trounces the Lakers tonight.
Yeah, I don't hate that at all.
So, you know, but we're taking big risks here.
Yeah.
So
it's hot take city.
That's going to wrap it up for us. You can check out dailyfantasycafe.com for all the great tools and content. And good luck tonight. Take that drink. Take that drink, bud. Later, guys.